So in your office day to day, you're getting buyers come in, buying a property. Let's talk a little about that process.
The first step in purchasing a property that I would say that I would recommend, I mean, some people may try to sort of try the do-it-yourself method and go on Zillow and try to figure out what's a good property and what's cash flowing and not. But especially if you're not a professional investor or someone that's been doing this for years and years, first recommendation is to get a good broker or realtor that's representing you. And there's multiple reasons why, but one of the main reasons is that you want someone that's knowledgeable being your advocate and someone with a lot of experience, especially if you have some of that knowledge gap, like you haven't really been an investor or you haven't been an investor here in South Florida. So if you get the right broker that will identify the right properties for you, figure out what some of the flaws in the property might be, figuring out what maybe the property rents for and the income, gathering some of those diligence items after they get under contract. But of course, one of the other main things they do is they help to negotiate a good contract price on the property. But so let's say hypothetically you've gotten the right advocate, your realtor broker, you put an offer in on a property, and then let's say it gets under contract. Well, what does the contract tend to look like? The time frames can vary. There's a few different main things that are highlighted in the contract that are super important. Of course, number one is the price, but assuming that's properly negotiated between the parties. The next thing is how much escrow deposit that the buyer is going to put up. So let's say it's a $600,000 property. Escrow deposits tend to be somewhere between 5 and 10% of the purchase price. So let's say maybe it's 5% of $30,000. The buyer would put that money up with a law firm here in Florida or title company. In Florida, either a law firm or a title company can do a closing on a property. The only difference is that law firms and attorneys can represent clients and give legal advice and have give them the right direction, legal advice, whereas a title company that's not attorney owned and run by an attorney can't really do that. Plus, we can draft other types of documents, any variety of different documents that are outside or peripheral to the closing process.
And here in South Florida, most of the title companies and closing attorneys, they're like kind of one and the same, right?
Sometimes there are title companies that are non-attorney owned. Then there are title companies that are attorney owned and attorney managed. So there's an attorney actively in that title company where they can give legal advice and do those things. And then there are just law firms. Like ours is a law firm, so we're only lawyers. We don't have an affiliated title company. It's kind of outside the scope of the conversation, but generally those are the two general types of entities that'll do a closing. But back to the contract is the next big thing is the closing date. How long do you want the closing date for? I'd say the general closing date is somewhere between 30 and 60 days on average. With larger multifamily properties, sometimes it's a little closer to the 60-day date. Have I seen longer closing dates? Sure. I've seen 90 and 20-day closing dates.
And many times that'll depend on whether the buyer is purchasing with cash or with a loan. So obviously the time frame will be extended if there's a loan being procured.
That's great. Exactly. You're 100% right. And that brings us to the next point is a lot of the contracts have a financing contingency so that if someone is buying, let's say that $600,000 property and they need a loan for that, in the contract, there's going to be a certain time frame in there that's going to allow the lender to go and do everything they need to do to underwrite the deal and then issue a loan approval letter within a certain time frame, which protects the buyer. So let's say hypothetically, we have a 60-day close date. Maybe we'd have a 45-day financing contingency. So it gives the lender 45 days to approve the loan or to deny the loan. And then if they deny the loan, then the buyer will go ahead and they can submit that loan denial letter to the seller and they would get their escrow deposit back, that $30,000 they put up on that $600,000 property. So those are some of the high level terms. There's a lot of nuances and there's a lot of different things that are involved in the contract and the negotiation process. But it's not a scary or daunting process as long as you have the right team in place, and that starts with your real estate broker. I also recommend getting an attorney, especially if you're working on a decent sized deal and multifamily. Whether it doesn't have to be us, there's many other attorneys out there, but get one to represent the buyer's interests in those closings.
Assist with the due diligence, getting all the documents that the seller will needs to provide,
Yeah.
including a rent roll, an appraisal if they have one, any financials that they have. Like you said, on
Correct.
larger properties, maybe a phase one environmental study, which basically lays out any potential negative impacts on the ground or the area around it beyond just the property itself. Although the phase ones will typically also talk about the property too.
Yes.
And I mean, in my experience, and of course in yours as well, you always want to get a property condition report too. Why is that so important?
Well, you want the seller putting it out there what they're disclosing as to the condition of the property, so that if you're relying on that to a certain extent. Now, should you also be doing a detailed inspection? 100%. You should be paying your inspector to go in there, and let's say it's a 4-unit property. They should be going in every single unit. They should be going on the roof. They should be doing a full inspection so that you can get a good sense for what that property and the booby traps, so to speak, of the physical condition of the property that are there. So that, let's say you get under contract for $600,000, maybe you do an inspection during the inspection period. Let's say it's a 10-day inspection period. If you find something significantly wrong with the property, like they didn't disclose that there's been major roof leaks, and they find out that there's 4 or 5 big roof leaks and the roof is on its last life, maybe you can go and negotiate a reduction in price from $600,000 to $580,000 to pay for that new $20,000 or $25,000 roof. Those are tactics that are used often by buyers agents and attorneys that we represent our clients. But yes, that inspection period is used to really go and figure out the condition of the property, along with what you just said is like that seller disclosure statement or property condition statement or report. If the seller signs off on that and says, okay, this is the condition, well, then you're allowed to rely on that to extent. And if you find out later on that that's not the case after, let's say you closed on the property and they didn't disclose that there was, black mold hidden behind the walls in this unit, and they knew about it, or you can prove that they knew about it, then you may have a case against them if you're going to sue for damages.
Right.
So it's nice to have that. Not all sellers are willing to give it, and if they're not willing to give it, then it's all negotiable, and then really you're just relying upon your inspection report that you're having your inspector do.
Yeah, the way I look at a due diligence period, like you said, it could be as short as 7 days, it could be 30 days, depending on the size of the property. Mm-hmm. It's the time to determine and really dig in to make sure that the business plan that you've been underwriting, like up until this point, will pan out. So that applies to the condition of the property, what kind of capital expenditures, which are like the large items like a roof, plumbing, electric, things like that. Will you or will you not have to invest and upgrade? Will you want to double check the rents that you're projecting you're going to get? You want to double check all the expenses. That's the time to really crystallize the business plan and make sure that you'll be able to get it done.
I agree 100%. Sometimes in certain deals they'll ask for tenant estoppel letters, which are it's a document that has all the details of the tenancy. So the tenant will say their name, the unit number, how much rent they're paying, if they're month to month, or if they have a lease, when the lease expires, how much security deposit they've given the landlord, and all these details will be on there. And then they need to sign that and date that. And you want to compare that tenant estoppel letter to what the seller's disclosing on their rent roll. So the rent roll essentially is a document in many transactions that the seller puts together that shows what rents that the tenants are owing, and they're supposed to be paying, how much they have been paying, if there's any balances, if there's any security deposits kept on file that they have or in their bank account. And then you want to compare those two, because a lot of times sellers will say one thing and then the tenant's saying something completely different, and you got to figure that out and figure out the discrepancy.
We know the horror stories there.
You do. I'm sure you do.
You can totally. I'm sure you've.
Because you take a property over after all this has happened, and then the buyer says, "Oh my God, like, what happened here?" If they don't get those signed estoppel letters and they're only relying on the rent roll, and they come to uncover and find out that the seller is just selling them a bill of goods, like
comes the first of the month, and instead of getting $10,000 in the account, they got $7,500.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the mortgage is $7,600.
And 3 of the tenants aren't paying. Yeah, exactly. And they probably weren't paying this whole time, but the landlord is, disguising that. So
and
the seller.
To that point, something we also make sure to do is we request bank statements to further like triple check that. So you've got the estoppels, or you've got the rent roll, assigned rent roll. You want to get that at the end of due diligence, also right before closing. Make sure that it's still accurate, and you compare that to the bank statements to see. You literally see those dollars came in, for that month.
That's
and
huge.
It's been consistent. Yeah.
Again, more value add that you as a property manager are adding that most landlords aren't, or novice buyers aren't going to take the time to do or even know how to do.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's great that you do that.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of, and we know plenty of them, owners, investors that they're savvy business people. They've made some good money. They've got capital, and they know the best place to deploy that money and to maintain the wealth is via real estate. But they don't know all the intricacies of buying real estate. So they may have even bought right. So they know that the property next door down the road sold for 20% more than what they're going to negotiate. So that it's great. But they didn't create a business plan. They didn't put a pro forma together. They didn't really underwrite anything. And then, it becomes a bit of a challenge with the management. So
agreed.
That's when, so we can bring value to owners and investors also in the due diligence and putting together that business plan and that budget so that we can execute it properly.
If I were buying a decent sized property, the first thing I would, well, not first, obviously I said get a broker, but you also want to get in touch with the property manager, because if they're going to be managing your property, I want to get on the same page with them with their plan for the property and the plan for the rents and what they're essentially committing to that the rents can be. Because if you created that relationship with them, then the property manager knows that they need to the property manager needs to not overpromise and underdeliver. They need to deliver on their promises properly. So, if you're going to go around town and just cold call people and say, oh yeah, what do you think in Lake Worth, what a 2-bedroom, 1-bath with 1,200 square feet workforce housing is going to go for, you'll get a bunch of different answers. But if you sign up with a property manager and you say, okay, you're going to be my manager, but I want to know exactly what this is going to rent for.
Set the expectations. Set the baseline and go from there.
That's it. Yeah.
Interesting thing, the other day I saw a property through a wholesaler, which wholesalers they're kind of like brokers, but they usually have licenses, but instead of getting a property signed as a listing, they get it usually under contract, and they flip the contract, they make a couple bucks, and they move pretty quickly. So I see a property, and it's like a 6-unit, so it's a multi-family property, which typically, that size, there's some level of sophistication behind it. But funny enough, it was an individual, and I'm always used to seeing like entities. So like, why would I always was taught to buy with an entity. Why would someone
great
buy a
question.
personal name?
Yeah, great question. So a couple things. The first thing I would say is for the reasons. Well, let me back up before we get into the reasons why. So in Florida, there tends to be 2 entities people use. One is either an LLC or just a regular corporation. I'd say 95% of the time now it's LLC. So it's almost synonymous with a corporation is using the word LLC. It's kind of like Coke for soda.
Kleenex tissue.
Yeah, exactly right. So LLCs can provide protection as long as the owner of the LLC is using them properly and not commingling funds with their personal funds. So an owner of an LLC that, let's say, owns a property would have to open a bank account for the property. They'd have to register on Sunbiz, which we can assist them with as attorneys, but and put together an operating agreement, which we also draft those. But the LLC would own that property, and all the funds need to come in and out of that account that's in the LLC's name, and again, not commingle with their personal funds. Let me give you an example of this, which was a terrible example, but
a real life example.
Real life example.
Okay.
One of my clients owned about 45 units in West Palm Beach, and they were what's called fractured condo. Without getting into too much detail, they own the majority of the condo units within this building of, let's say, 60 units. They own 2/3 of them, so like 45 of them. They owned all 45 units in one LLC. Okay, great. Well, they didn't have liability personally for it, but the problem was one of those units, it was a single mother, and she had a child. I think the child was very young, like 3 or 4 years old. The mother had the door open, was down the hall doing whatever she was doing with one of the neighbors, and this child went ahead and turned the oven on. The oven started a fire, and unfortunately, by the time people realized and smelled the smoke or whatever it was, I think the child was inside the apartment and died from smoke inhalation. Very terrible story. Well, they ended up being sued for several $1,000,000, and the problem was their LLC owned 45 of those units that, let's say each unit was worth whatever it was worth at the time, $200,000. It was worth well more than the, let's say, $3 million they were being sued for. Their insurance paid for some portion of it, like I think it was like maybe $2 million of the $3 million, but that was the cap. And then they had to come out of pocket to pay the other $1 million. So what they did afterwards, after that tragedy happened and they settled the lawsuit, is they went ahead and moved all of the properties into no more than 2 units per one LLC, so that one LLC then would have 2 units worth, let's say, $200,000 each, so would have no more than $400,000 worth of assets in it. Let's say the person sues for $3 million, insurance pays the $2 million. They might just say, I don't care, you can have my LLC, my 2 units here worth $400,000.
Nice.
I'm not going to stroke a check for another $1 million, because that would have saved them $600,000 there essentially. And then all their other LLCs and the properties would have been protected from that lawsuit because they're in separate LLCs. Hopefully that makes sense. But
you can't do that with a multifamily property, though. Meaning you can't own different units.
Correct. If it's one property, one parcel, one property, it's only going to be one LLC, exactly. And so whether it's 6 units or 200 units, it's going to be one LLC for that property. But let's get back to the motivation for why people either own it in their personal name or an LLC. A lot of it depends on whether they're trying to get financing or not. If they're trying to get financing, so meaning if they want a lender to lend them money, if it's 4 units and under, and it's a regular conventional loan, 30-year mortgage, that's likely going to be a federally backed loan. They're going to require it be in their personal name. Now, what can they do to protect themselves? Well, you can increase your liability. Maybe you want to, instead of maybe having a $500,000 liability policy, you tell your insurance agent, I want $1 million or a $2 million insurance policy. And it's not that much more expensive. The liability insurance is really not the real cost for insurance. It's really just a small portion of it. So that's one thing you can do. Now, when it's beyond 4 units, so 5 units and larger, that gets into commercial loans and commercial lending. Those are going to require that a borrower use an LLC. So you will almost always see an LLC for very large properties. The only exception would be if someone buys a property cash, then maybe they can do the opposite. Like they can own a commercial property in their personal name. I'm not really sure why they'd want to do that. Like a big 200-unit property, they could. Right. I've never really seen that. Yeah. It probably would be foolish to do that. Or if they buy a 3 triplex cash, they can put it in an LLC.
Right.
Yeah.
Important to have insurance, property
right.
insurance, because to protect from any liability, whether it's negligence on the part of the owner or on the part of tenants or even someone from the public who comes on site. Part of this conversation is ensuring that your property is well lit up at night. There is no trip hazards. There's nothing that could potentially, God forbid, lead to any casualty or any injury. But things always happen, so that's why it's important to have insurance.
I agree, and making sure that maybe you do shop around a little bit for your policy, but you also want to, again, with any of these processes of being a landlord, from identifying the property to renting the property to getting under contract and the closing or the eviction, whatever, you want to rely on experts and expertise. And I think it's really good maybe to get at least 2 different insurance quotes on a property and ask those basic questions about, hey, what does this include? What does wind include, or flood insurance, and what about this liability, and what happens if A, B, or C happens? And ask some of those practical questions, because insurance sometimes can even me, because I'm not an insurance attorney, I don't do insurance defense or even really plaintiff litigation for insurance issues, but my eyes can glaze over when I'm talking to my insurance agent about these things. So I try to keep it sort of layman's terms, just basic language when they're talking to me, and I recommend that landlords do that as well.
Yeah. Especially for guys like us. Like, are you? Let me just go this way. Are you personally buying? Are you looking to buy? Because the returns that you're getting on your property until now, you're not. Especially according to how you explained it.
What I'm doing now is I've kind of shifted a little bit. I'm now doing property flips. That's kind of what I've been doing. I just completed one. My partner and I, we bought a $400,000 property, put 125 into it, sold it for 775. We made netted 182, so 91,000 each. Yeah, it wasn't bad. It was 4 months essentially. We had some money out there. Just got under contract for another property for 620,000. We're going to put a couple $100,000, $200,000 to $250,000 in it. We're thinking it could sell for anywhere from 1.2 to 1.5. That's in West Palm and Northwood. Looking at another property now. So
different strategy.
Different strategy for now, because I'm waiting personally for insurance to come down a little bit. Do I think rates are going to come down? Not for a long time. That's a whole nother macroeconomic story. I think as long as we're spending a $3 or $4 trillion deficit each year, it's going to continue to have our inflation a little too high, not getting down to that 2% level that the Fed wants. So I just don't see when they're going to really be reducing rates, because I think if they drop rates, I think we're going to see inflation go through the roof and get uncontrollable. So I think this is just a temporary different strategy I have. There's things I like about it. There's things I don't like about it. I don't love having to pay my regular income taxes on that every time we flip and I pull my profits out. I'm just paying my normal income tax rate. It's a way to put money to work while you. It's a way to put money to work rather than leaving it in a savings account making nothing, or even a money market account making 4.5%. This way, I'm making a much higher percentage on the money. Is there risk involved? Absolutely. Is that something that people should or could dabble in? I don't recommend it. Yeah. I'm only doing it because I've got some. I know people. I got a partner. He's technically not a GC, but he has GCs he works with. Most of the stuff we do is mostly internal rehab. Yeah, maybe we'll paint on the outside or fix the lawns and things like that. But it's mostly internal work that doesn't require permits. So it's pretty quick. Sometimes we'll pull a permit on some windows or a roof, or that can make a 4-month job turn into that. Exactly. 6 to 8 months. Or longer. If you're doing internal permits on, like, if you're going to completely gut a kitchen or whatever, and you're doing permits on everything, it can take a long time. But yes, it's there's money in it, but there's risk in it too, and you could get caught with your pants down, so to speak. Sure. If the economy shifts quickly. So it's something that I'm a little nervous about, because I don't mind for my multifamily if property prices drop 10%. Okay, jump in. Now the water's warm again. But you don't want to see that when you're in the middle of a flip. That'll hurt. So, right. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. That may change in 6 months or a year, and just whatever opportunities come around. The multifamily types of properties that I would consider buying would be seller financing. If it's anything seller financing, so that I can void the wind insurance, and I can get a reasonable rate. Maybe if they'd finance at 6% or 6.5%, and I don't need wind, then that would be something I would consider. Doesn't seem to be a ton of those properties out there. I wish there was. There are some. I've seen some of those. Yeah. So, but if you run into it, let me know. Yeah, for sure. That's good stuff. That's interesting. Yeah. What about yourself? What are you seeing in deals? None. Yeah. I mean, I just spoke to somebody the other day. He's an investor / client. Partner / client, and he said he feels like he's finally starting to see some market deals that are like somewhat making sense, like where there's like he sees the end of the bridge. Got it. Yeah. Like it's coming back to reality. Like it used to be like completely just like out of whack. You could look at the deal for 30 seconds and be like, this is crazy. Yeah, the price like just price per door. Like it doesn't even it doesn't start, and you look at the rent roll, you're never going to get there. Right. But he feels like he's starting to see it a little bit.
And I mean, when I talk to other players, right? So the bigger guys, they're not even doing equity deals. They're either doing, or they're doing a lot of debt, whether they're issuing or buying debt. You've got some developers that are doing projects that they take 3 to 5 years. So like it's already another cycle. So they have a different time frame, whole different approach. And then you do have also some bigger players that are able to, we're seeing some of those headlines of distress, but they're being snapped up by the real big, either public companies or just the massive landlords in the country. For us little guys, I mean, we have to really scratch for an opportunity. We cold call.
Yeah.
We try to, maintain good relationships with the brokers where they can send us deals before they broadcast it, or maybe they know that we've done a deal nearby, so like they can go to their seller and say, listen, I'll get you, I can get you a buyer that will definitely close, and maybe we can get a price that makes sense. And like you said, also seller financing is something we're looking at. But it's been a dry season for a while now.
I think it's because we're in a shifting market, and the ground underneath us is shifting a little bit. But listen, if someone's bringing in $1 million cash from New York and they want to buy a property cash, hey, there's a decent return. Let's say you're getting a 6% return on your money. You're getting depreciation on the property, on your taxes. Over time, you're going to get appreciation. I don't know right now over the next 12 to 24 months where everything will work out, whether prices will maintain or go up slightly or down slightly. But it's not a bad place to put your cash.
Yeah.
Just using leverage is not
That's
really feasible right now.
Yeah.
It's not.
No, and I know guys like that. We're actually in the middle of talking to a New York buyer to manage their property. They came in and bought some property in Miami and all cash. And if they had debt on these properties, they wouldn't last.
Yeah.
So it's all cash. And you mentioned a very good point. If your horizon is long term, which that kind of industry is like 5+ years, let's say 5 to 10 years, then you will do well.
Yes.
I mean, really, all tides rise. But like you said, some of those other markets, Midwest and whatnot, they're not going to be as attractive on the appreciation. But I think South Florida's joined that, like you said, tier 1, where the appreciation will be strong.
I think so too. I really do. I think it's a good place to be in. And I'm also, I've put money as a lender in private lending, hard money lending in the past. I just had a breakfast meeting again with my friend who does that.
Yeah.
He's got a big fund, and I'm probably going to be putting a portion of my money in that too, even if I don't have all of it in there, because I want to have some dry powder to put down on some deals that I'm looking at. But even if I put I don't know, whatever, a quarter of my funds in something like that, making 10, 11+%, it's not a bad little gig. It makes up for having money sitting in a checking account for a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good
stuff.
Yeah.
This is fun.